All right. Well, God bless you and welcome. I'm Mark Wallace. This is True North Studio, where we live the Word and walk with power. Today is October 12th, 2012, and I had trouble trying to title this thing today. I either called it Our Collective Believing or Shields Up, and you'll see why. And today I'm going to show two things. One, that even during the worst of times, there is a way to remain positive and keep our believing at its highest level. And two, for this to really happen, we will need to rely on each other and not just ourselves. Your believing can take you so far. But the group will take us over the top. And Ephesians, we're going to only be in Ephesians chapter 6 today. And I ask you to think when I'm talking and not just go into a preconceived teaching that you heard, 20 years ago. Think of this fresh, because I think you're going to hear this taught fresh today. Ephesians 6, verse 10. Finally, my brethren, be strong in the Lord and in the power of His might. I was thinking about that word finally. Finally, what does it mean? What was leading up to this point? Why does he change the focus and the shift right here? Ephesians is an incredible book. From this point on, starting right now, start today. That's what he's saying. Start right now, finally. In your current situation, empower yourself by putting yourself into the shoes of the one who has not only mastered the art of dominion, but has the physical strength to help you hold it together. There have been many things that have led each of us to this particular time and this particular place. And each of us have a lot under our belt. That's formed us into what we believe and exactly who we are today. Things happen. And what's about to be shown in the following section of Scripture is how we can understand how to deal with the worst of times by making the most of our time together. And verse 11, put on the whole armor of God, that ye may be able to stand against the wiles of the devil. And of course, we have all these things reeling in our head. And you think of armor, and you think of the devil in some red costume with horns and some pointy tail or some ridiculous thing. If it was that easy, you could get away easier. And so many Christians today try to modernize or to gentrify or water down this military example with an athletic or a lesser analogy so that it's going to be accepted in our sheepish society. What Paul saw in that culture was brutal. It was a brutality that you don't even see on TV. What you see on TV with ISIS is nothing compared to what the Romans did. It's nothing. Nothing at all. The Romans would fill a stadium with 20,000 people, civilians, just regular people, and then they would pit animal against animal to the death, animal against human to the death. They would pit human against human to the death. They would pit groups of people, sort of armies of their convicted felons against each other until they're all dead. And you couldn't leave the stadium until everybody's dead. They would tie people up and let animals eat them. And people just cheered and loved it. It's nothing compared to today. This is the Rome that Paul understood. This is where Paul lived at this point, these 2 years. He was chained to Roman soldiers day and night. He smelt the blood. And the sweat. Now we're going to turn this negative example, because everybody in Ephesus, everybody in that first century understood what Paul was talking about. These Roman soldiers all wore a helmet, all had a breastplate, all had a shield, all had a belt, all had a sword, and all wore these spiked sandals that made noise when they walked on the rocks and would hurt like heck if they stepped on your toe. They all dressed the same. The swords were the same length. The shields were exactly the same. These things have been designed over hundreds of years. War hadn't changed much, except for redesigning the same equipment until gunpowder. And that was the great equalizer, gunpowder. You see, before that, it was all hand to hand, man to man, face to face. So what we're talking about here is believing face to face against your adversary. How do we do that? How do you live fearless in a world that causes so much fear? Let's drop our preconceived ideas and read it at face value. And if we can actually understand what's written, just maybe we will grasp Paul's point and improve our own situation. See, Paul's going to use a common, everyday example to prove a very uncommon point. You see, like I said, everybody was familiar with these heavily armed Roman foot soldiers. It was just, they were there. Everywhere around the Mediterranean, Rome had taken over. And they would carry this 60 pounds of gear with them everywhere they went. When they came in to see Paul, they wore it. They wore it to the store. They wore it home. They wore it everywhere so they could keep the strength up. And the moment Rome stopped wearing all the gear and they complained about the weight and they complained about, and they stopped training like they were, that's when they lost their empire. But when they trained for war during times of peace, they trained for battle all day long, every day. Every day, just carrying that stuff was strengthening themselves. Not to mention, many of them carried 5 days worth of food with them. So, I mean, they all had to. I mean, this is not what we think. Not what we think. It's not war. It's not a world like we understand. It was deadly, it was brutal, it was bloody, and it stunk. These Romans were successful because they'd taken the time to perfect the art of war and were constantly ready for action, especially during times of peace. The same will work for us. Are you really ready to receive? What are you really going to do when you get that job? What are you going to do if you actually got $1 million in your hands? What are you going to do? Could you handle it? Paul's going to show us that in reality, there is never a time of peace spiritually. You are always and constantly under surveillance and attack. And to have peace, we train like there is none. And I'm not talking about going out and working out and getting a shield. You got to get that out of your head. He's using this as an analogy. And all these are going to pertain to some way of thinking or behavior, everything we're going to go to in these 6 attributes that a Roman soldier had. You see, we learn to never drop our shields. So here we go, that word finally. In that first verse. What Paul's really trying to tell us at the close of Ephesians was was what God had worked in his heart after this amazing first few chapters of this. And Paul takes a breath and he goes, finally. Now, you think about Ephesians. 1:3 talks about that we have all spiritual blessings. 1:4 says that we're chosen before the foundation of the world. God wanted you before there was even an earth. That's wanted. That we can know the riches of our inheritance. 1:18. That we can exactly understand the greatness of his power because we know how to believe. 1:19 talks about 3:20. It says we can do exceeding abundantly above all that we ask or think according to the power that works in us. Yet in chapter 6, right at the end when he's closing this thing. Now remember, when Paul was imprisoned in Rome and chained to the soldiers, he wrote 4 epistles: Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians, and Philemon. And you're going to see how Paul did not feel sorry for himself. And I'm not going to show it. You can look it up. He never calls himself a prisoner of Rome. Never calls himself a prisoner of Rome. He calls himself a prisoner of the Lord Jesus Christ. He's just going to do what God wants him to do no matter where he is or what's going on around him. And if you read these epistles, they're crazy positive. There's so many positives in there. Christians have these decoupaged all over their refrigerators. Stuff from Philippians, Colossians, Ephesians, and Philemon. It's amazing. And it's so giving. It's all about working together to help each other overcome. Whereas like Galatians, which wasn't written at that time, was pretty direct and straightforward. And, it was right in your face. You see how Paul kept his mind and mouth positive during the worst of times. It's a big lesson here, folks. A big lesson. From this point on, here's my final piece of advice. Come on over here. Settle down. Have a seat. Because I'm about to share with you my final bit of advice. Now, nobody knows what order these 4 were written in. And he says finally a few times in these epistles. And they're all cool. Look up the word finally, sometime in the Bible, and you'll see, that Paul uses. And it's all some cool stuff. After finally, then he goes into some great stuff. See, Paul's saying, I'm going to show you the true source of your problems and how you can have victory over them if you faithfully work hard to develop just a few little habits, but all the while working together. What I'm about to share is so simple that most people miss it. Here we go. Remember, this is a summation, Paul's final attempt at helping us understand how we got to this place in life and how to rectify the situation no matter how bleak it seems. And when Paul says the whole armor of God, we'll talk about mastering these 5 or 6 things and keeping them close to us at all times. When those Roman soldiers were with Paul, they were in their gear. He heard the clunk of the shield set down. He knew what the helmet looked like and how the breastplate was pounded out and made just to fit that man. He would just keep working these things. Well, I'm sort of jumping ahead of myself. He would work his equipment to fit him perfectly. We work our minds, we work our believing to fit us perfectly. Because what you can do is different than what I can do. First, we have to know, and here's the first thing, we have to know our real enemy. And this is really hard for us. Verse 12. Because we get mad because our boss pissed us off. Or we get mad because our wife nagged us. We get mad because our husband didn't take out the trash. We get mad because, because our best girlfriend or boyfriend or, somebody, said something behind our back and it came back to us. We get mad because our paycheck was cut because of finance. We get mad at all these things and we blame all these people. Oh, it's the country's fault. It's the world's fault. Let's just see what the word says here. For we wrestle not against flesh and blood. So would your boss be flesh and blood? Would your wife, your husband, your girlfriend, your boyfriend, your children, your parents? Sure. We wrestle not against flesh and blood. That's not our real fight, our real contest, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places. That's where all your problems come from, folks. Last time I taught this, I had a few people get mad at me, which is weird because they said, well, you're saying my problems are spiritual? I said, yes. Well, people don't want to think that. They want to blame that person or that group or that country. What they're doing and what they're not doing. It's ultimately the orchestration of the great enemy of God, who is the devil. We wrestle not against flesh and blood, not against flesh and blood, not against flesh and blood, not even your own. Not even your own. It simplifies the blame game here. There's no blame. Paul's chained to Romans because he spoke the word and somebody didn't like it. 2 years he's imprisoned. But he kept his mind together by keeping his speech together, by keeping his heart together. He just spoke the word like crazy, but he kept it positive. If you've ever been in jail, it's not much fun. There's nothing happy about it. Unless you like orange, or stripes, depending on where you are, pink, so I mean, it's nutty stuff. Unless you like metal and concrete and lousy food, you see, but that's nothing. Now just think. This simplifies that blame game. It clarifies their focus. It pinpoints their mindset. It simplifies our believing. There's nobody to blame. There's no person to blame, so stop doing it. Who does it ever help? We foolishly blame society, our parents, our brothers, our sister, our upbringing, our boss, that group, and all the while we're doing that, we're being manipulated even more by the enemy. We become unforgiving and it just poisons our system. Hate can wait. We must first understand that life is as much spiritual as it is physical. And this is so hard to see because you can't see it. Yet we feel the effects every day. Why did you do that stupid thing that time? I'm telling you, you got manipulated, baby. I got manipulated. Our unseen enemy has worked on us since birth and has manipulated our friends and surroundings in an attempt to mold us into a lesser version of ourselves. God has other plans. God called you before the foundation of the world. That's how he opens this whole thing up. Before the foundation of the world, he knew exactly who he wanted you to be, who he designed you to be, who you can be, and what you can have. Verse 13, training. Wherefore, take unto you the whole armor of God, that ye may be able to withstand in the evil day, and having done all, to stand to the evil day. It's not one evil day. It's always the evil day. That means it's always time to stand. Now, he's using this Roman analogy here. Those soldiers were always ready for battle. If they heard the trumpet, they would leave wherever they are, the bar, Denny's restaurant, wherever they go, the donut shop, the target range. They would do whatever it takes, and then they would form up into their groups. Wherefore means through all this, in order to push through your personal attacks, here's what you do. Take up, pick up, master your whole armor. What does that mean? Master your life. Be masters of you. And to do that, you have to master your believing. You have to master your mind. Master your mouth. And that's almost uncontrollable, the tongue. It's an unruly evil, it says in James, right? It's just unruly. It says things that you don't want it to say sometimes. Like, why did I say that? That was crazy. But it's too late. It's like trying to put the cat back in the bag. You ain't going to do it. The word's out, folks. See, the purpose of this is so that each of us will be able to have the believing strength to stand against our enemy. We're able to function when things go south, when life happens. The evil day is nothing more than what we have to deal with every day. There's not one evil day you're gonna finally hit someday in your life, except for tomorrow. And tomorrow. It's always there. But we can be so strong that we're ready for it. Having done all, stand means that when we've done everything we can do to better our situation, when push comes to shove, we will be the ones standing. Every day is an evil day, but every day is a great day. And Paul's showing you here, here's how to make your bad day good. Here's how to make your bad days better. Historical perspective. Now, I went through this, but basically at the same time Paul was imprisoned, a guy named Nero had ascended to the imperial throne. And to flex his newfound political power and his political muscles, he sent armies to protect Rome's eastern border in the buffer state of Armenia. And that's just north of Israel. And Rome went to war with the Parthians at that time, who we would call Iranians. Funny. There's never not been war in that area. There always will be. And if things are like it seems in the book of Revelation, that's where the last battles are going to be. If it's not an allegorical. So it's crazy stuff. So here we are, and he's trying to protect this Silk Road that went all the way from China to the Mediterranean Sea. Now, these Persians, they wanted to take this over because, after all, it's all about money and power. And during that 2-year period, Paul wrote the epistles of Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians, Philemon, while he was chained to these different Roman soldiers. And these epistles were then sent out and circulated throughout the different fellowships, and they were so positive, so amazing in such a negative, hateful, bloody, brutal world that they hand copied these things, and that's why we have them today. During Paul's darkest days, he spoke the greatest light. And at the same time, there's great unrest in Israel. And you guys have heard of the Masada, right? That was like 70 AD. But leading up to this, even during this time, Israel was rebelling against Rome. They wanted their country back, and they wanted it now. And there were skirmishes beginning to happen. So Rome was spreading itself into different battles, fighting the Persians. Now the Judeans were rising up again. And this upstart Christian thing was causing these Judeans fits because of money and power, political moves. And so, they thought, well, we need to stop this with all prejudice. And they wanted to put down Judaism too, just once and for all, because they were deadly. There was they killed thousands and thousands of Jews, and the Jews at times killed thousands and thousands of Roman soldiers in different battles. It wasn't just always one way. The Romans didn't always win every battle. They all knew also that Paul had once been a bloodthirsty murderer. Not so much unlike the Romans. What Paul saw in Rome, in the Colosseums, and heard people talking about, he had done the same stuff. He knew the smell of blood coming off of a sword on the corner of a rock when it split a person's head open. He knew. I mean, this is not nice stuff. Paul was once not a nice guy, but look how he changed everything about him and changed the world in the process. And Paul understood and saw the unifying brutality of the Roman culture. Now, man, like I said, it's hard for us to understand this, but he also saw what he could learn from these guys too, these soldiers. And even the Roman, like I said earlier, the Roman entertainment was bloody. And they built over 200 these amphitheaters or colosseums in lands that they took over. And in all these, they would have sports games, but they weren't known for that. They were known for the gladiators. They were known for the death that happened in there. And the blood just soaks into that soil. Imagine what those places smelled like. And they did this all day long. They could go to these things. It wasn't just once a month or a year. They could see this stuff consistently in these colosseums. Later on, it was not at this time, but a few years after, the money after Rome really kicked Israel's butt in 70 AD and Jerusalem fell, the money they stole from the Judeans was what they built the big Colosseum in Rome. The Flavius, whatever it's called, amphitheater. I mean, that's where they got the money to build that thing. Was from the Judeans. I mean, so it's crazy stuff. And in that, they would sometimes flood these things, the lower level, and they would bring ships in, and they would have convicts come out, and they would play out the battles, and they would all kill each other to the cheers and applause of everybody. And the Romans would also, they would demonstrate, they would do shows, reenactments, it's called, of their battles, be it naval or on the ground. And in those, they would at times use live fire or arrows against others. So this is what Paul saw and heard about when we think about this. A guy named, you've heard of St. Augustine, right? It's a good kind of grass that grows in Texas and Florida. But this isn't talking about grass. But Augustine writes, quote, and he's talking about one of his friends. And this is a guy who is so straight arrow. He was going to law school in Rome, but he didn't want to go to the Colosseum because he thought he didn't like the bloodlust and the blood sport. Just like some people don't like boxing or mixed martial arts. It's too bloody. Nothing compared to what everybody in Rome just loved. Well, this guy, St. Augustine's talking about this story of his friend Alipus. And this guy went from hating it to becoming addicted to blood, this blood sport. And, quote, he had gone to Rome before me to study law, which was the worldly way which his parents were forever urging him to pursue. And there he was carried away again with the incredible passion for the gladiatorial shows. For although he had been utterly opposed to such spectacles and detested them, one day he met by chance a company of his acquaintances and fellow students returning from dinner, and with a friendly violence they drew him, resisting and objecting vehemently, into the amphitheater. On the day of those cruel and murderous shows, he protested to them, quote, though you drag my body to that place and set me down there, you cannot force me to give my mind or lend my eyes to these shows. Thus I will be absent while present, and so overcome both you and them. And when they heard this, they dragged him on in, probably interested to see whether he could do as he said. And when they got into the arena and had taken what seats they could get, the whole place became a tumult of inhuman frenzy. But Alipus closed his eyes and forbade his mind to roam abroad after such wickedness. Would that he had shut his ears also. For when one of the combatants fell in the fight, a mighty cry from the whole audience stirred him so strongly. Overcome by curiosity, and still prepared, as he thought, to despise and rise superior to it, no matter what it was, he opened his eyes and was struck with a deeper wound in his soul than the victim whom he desired to see had in his body. Thus he fell more miserably than the one whose fall had raised that mighty clamor which had entered through his ears and unlocked his eyes to make way for the wounding and beating down of his soul, which was more audacious than truly valiant. It also was weaker because it presumed on its own strength when it ought to have depended on thee. For as soon as he saw the blood, he drank in with a savage temper, and he did not turn away, but fixed his eyes on the bloody pastime, unwittingly drinking in the madness, delighting with the wicked contest, and drunk with the bloodlust. He was no longer the same man who came in, but was one of the mob he came into, a true companion of those who had brought him thither. Augustine. A lot of people love the world. They love the torture and the punishment and the slavery. A lot of people love the hurt they can instill on other people. They relish in it. All of Rome did. It was popular to be brutal. From this perspective of overpowering public desire to dominate every other human, even to the death, Paul is about to tell us how to flourish in the habitat of our choosing and how to get out of the ones that we were forced into. And here's how to stand through each and every attack. Remember, finally, know who your enemy really is. Get good at using, at being you. Be the best you could possibly be. And here, verse 14. Stand therefore, having your loins girt about with truth, and having on the breastplate of righteousness. See, Paul's going to take a sweat and blood-stained piece of equipment and turn it into truth here. And here's how we can stand to withstand any attack. And here's how we take a stand and then stay on our feet. So number one, we have our loins girt about with truth. And the Roman soldier wore a thick leather belt, and it was to hold their swords. And a sword was always on the right side. And in front of this belt was these leather straps like other belts had hung down in front of it. And it had placed on each of those straps all these round brass like half balls or designs. And basically this would protect their junk, and it would also make noise when they walked. There was no sneaking for a Roman legionnaire. Now there's a point to this. With this belt, you're no longer invisible. You're not in your own little world anymore. You can be heard coming. And the enemy would hear these things click, 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 clicking together, these brass balls, so to speak. And as they walked, and it would be a fearsome sound when there's 10,000 guys moving and these things are clacking. You know, and in a sense, it takes brass balls to stand against our problems. You see, Paul's saying there's no sneaking around. We deal with our problems. We deal with our opposition, standing straight up, head on, and face to face. The enemy already knows you're coming, so take him on. Now, what is your enemy? Well, your enemy is what you don't have, or what seems to be overpowering your life. Lack can be an enemy. Where did it come from? We wrestle not against flesh and blood. It came ultimately from our great enemy, the devil. Whatever your problem is, whatever my problem is. The word loins means hips. It doesn't just mean your waist, where you're strong, you know. It means hips. In fact, that's what the word means. Hips represent our reproductive powers, so to speak. We surround and protect the truth with the same conviction we would protect our genitals. That's what this belt is, that's what he's talking about. To us, you know, it's laughable, but you know, it's a very real thing. When you play sports, guys wear a cup, right? In a lot of sports, girls protect themselves other ways in other places, you know, but we protect the truth within us because, as a modern vocal artist of the day saying, the hips don't lie. You see, you know, it's truth. We protect the truth because we want to replicate that truth over and over and over again. And that's what Paul did all through Ephesians and Philippians and Colossians and Philemon. He just kept replicating the truth, propagating the truth. So we protect our ability to do that. The first thing, you never stop yourself from speaking the truth. Never stop yourself from thinking the truth. Never allow anyone to stop you, because it's all you got, folks. This is step one in how to get over each and every problem, is protect the truth that you have. Surround yourself. Here, we'll go to 2 here. So number 2, we have on the breastplate of righteousness. Of course, you think about the shiny armor and all this stuff, you know, but, you know, really to have on means to surround yourself with, or to melt into, or meld into, or form into, or become one with what's true and right and just. This is behavior. This is a decision, folks. It means living right. You form yourself into the person that you know you should be. That's what this is saying. This is step 2. First, you protect the truth with everything. And you take on your problems head on. And now we have on that breastplate of righteousness. A Roman soldier would hammer out his breastplate to fit his changing body. When he first joins a legion, he may just have a little piece of metal with some straps, and then he just keeps adding to that. He builds that thing a lot of times. unless they're rich soldiers. And he would pound it out. As his pecs grew, he would have to reshape it. As his shoulders grew, he'd have to reshape it, add pieces. He just keeps reshaping that breastplate, so it fits him perfectly, so he can move in one with that, with what's right. We're one with what's right. That's what it's saying. It became more ornate as he grew. He might be in the legions for 20, 25 years. So he just kept working on this thing and working on it and working on it. I don't like how it feels here. When I swing my sword this way, when I carry it pinches. He just would keep changing things and keep adapting it. Adapt yourself to fit to the truth. Decorate the truth. Engrave the truth. Polish your truth. Just think, if that was your armor that you made, and you were going to have that and wear that for 25 years every day, would you take care of it? Oh yeah. Especially you got to lug that thing around, especially when you're going into battle intermittently. You don't want it to be the lightest thing, nor do you want it to be the heaviest. It's got to be just right. As he grew in strength, he would refashion it to fit so he could move well and be protected. So to recap, first we protect our ability to propagate truth and confront our problems head on. We surround our loins with truth. We protect the truth. Next, we become one with what is right. We fashion our behavior. We make it just fit perfectly. We fit perfectly into what's right. We're just one with right. We're right. That's the breastplate of righteousness. 15, and your feet shod with the preparation of the gospel of peace. This is third. You lace up your shoes in preparation to receive that message of peace. Now, this is interesting. See, peace also means to be at one with. That's what the word peace means. To be at one with. To be at rest is another translation. To be at rest. If you're in a foreign country, let's say Mexico, would you just go down to Mexico City and just sleep on a park bench? Would you feel comfortable doing that? Probably not smart. Probably not too smart. Go to Piedras Negras or Juarez, Probably wouldn't be too smart to just, to do that if you're not a local, you see. But to be at rest, to be quiet-minded. So to be at peace, there's a place you have to be at peace. And sometimes it's that place is just within our minds. And that's what he's talking about here. Now, how can you get to the place you're at peace? So this is step 3. Nothing quite fits you quite like your own shoe. You ever put on somebody else's shoes, even if they're your size, and they feel weird? Because the balls of their feet, they sort of wear in the cushioning a certain way, and the toes do, and the heels different, and they walk outside on their heels or inside, or it just feels weird. A Roman infantryman's sandals had spikes or cleats in the sole, and it was specifically designed for traction. And they were only designed to move forward. They weren't designed to walk backwards. There's no retreat. And it's got to feel right. So you lace up your shoes in the preparation to receive a message of peace. Take peace personally. Get so used to it that it just fits you like your shoe, like your Birkenstocks, or whatever you wear. Take the time to make peace personal. Prepare yourself to be peaceful. Prepare yourself for peace. A peaceful mind is a mind that will never retreat. You just move forward with peace. See how this is all aggressiveness? Believing is always forward acting. It's never static. A peaceful mind will always believe to move forward and will never allow itself to slip backward. Above all, that's really it. So that's the third one. Now 16. Above all, taking the shield of faith, wherewith ye shall be able to quench all the fiery darts of the wicked. This verse is so full of information that it basically just blows my mind. Above all, taking the shield of faith. Now, I used to think above all means above everything else. Instead of like finally, now this is the finally. Well, that's not what it means. It literally means above you. Above you. Above you, take the shield of faith. Put your shield above you. And I think, well, you never see people fighting like that. I'm going to hold my shield here. And, there's a reason for this. Wherewith ye may be able to quench all the fiery darts of the wicked. So we put over our heads this protective shield that we call believing. And with this thing called faith or believing, we can quench all the flaming arrows of what is hurtful to us. And this is the mind picture Paul had when he taught about the shield of believing. For it to be effective, it takes teamwork. It takes time for us to do this thing. Now, my point here is this putting a shield over the head was typically a formation called the testudo, which means tortoise in Latin. And the Roman soldiers were when they got the order, they would to go into this testudo formation. They knew exactly how they were supposed to do this, and they would just each one they would get a certain distance together, and then boom, 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 and they would set this up and protect themselves and protect each other. I mean, it was always the way, and they could do this in seconds. For the time that it would take for an arrow to fly from whatever fortification to them, they could be in that formation. And this is a formation that could be moved slowly because they're low to the ground. They got spike shoes, and they have to move all together. You ever try to move as a group? So they had to move. They had to practice this, and they practiced this over and over and over because this would save their lives. There's a historical record of one guy who, after a battle, had 110 arrows in his shield. 110. And then he lost an eye, and he went on to continue to fight and smite them hip and thigh. But it's crazy. So this testudo. Now the Romans had other formations. They had this square formation they used against cavalry, with the lances facing out. When the horses were coming, they would snap in. They had all these different shield formations. This shield was made exactly a certain way. It was laminated layers with this, put together with this horse glue, and then it had a layer of canvas, and then it had a skin on top of that, and then a metal edge on it that would catch the edge of a sword, like brass or bronze, so it would stick there just for a second. But they would soak the shields in water before battle. And then should the enemy foolishly try to shoot flaming arrows at them, it would quench them. But it means more than that here. Because really, in reality, nobody used flaming arrows against troops. They didn't. They used flaming arrows against wooden structures. Because a flaming arrow you can't shoot as fast as a regular arrow. You have to loosen the bowstring, and so your range is minimized quite a bit with a flaming arrow. Or if you shot it at the same speed, it's going to blow itself out if you had a rag or something on there. So it's different. They didn't have exploding heads and stuff like Rambo had back in the day. You know, it isn't like that. And so they'd also use these in recreations of battles, because spectators may not be able to see the arrows, so they would use these flaming arrows in these stadiums to show how a battle went. Or they would use these things for intimidation, because when fire's coming at you, it's a little different. You can see a bunch of arrows coming. It's different. You know the enemy's close, and so really, the flaming arrow at troops is really for intimidation. It's just an intimidation tactic. Because the shields easily stopped them. And hides don't burn, especially wet hides. And with a loose string, the arrow doesn't have the same strength either. So it was more for intimidation. See, when you see the attack coming, we raise our shields by believing, and then we work to help each other. We cover each other. There's all kinds of historical records, which I'm not going to take time to read if you study out this testudo, you see. But these guys would, the first group goes down and they set the shields up right. They get on their knee. And then the row behind them will put their shield over their head. And then the next row puts a shield over their head, their head, their head, their head. They said it looks much like a tile roof, like you've seen the tile roofs. And they said, and then one historian said, it's as if the arrows just bounce off of them. The Romans over time, they had hundreds of years to work on this shield. Hundreds of years to figure out the exact angle, the exact curvature, the exact height and width, so they could do all these formations. How much time have you put into perfecting your believing? And some things are great, you rock. And other things we don't rock as well. It's easy to believe for the things we want to do. It's easy to believe for the things that we are good at receiving. But the things we're not, that's where we have to put in the work. You see? And that's where we need the testudo. We need each other. There's things you can see that I'll never see. I'm just not sharp enough. You talk about watching our six. Well, that was the whole thing the Romans did. They watched each other's back. I mean, and they could snap into this, they could move, and then just as quick they could go back into an offensive formation. And as long as they kept their tactics and kept their training and kept their strength up, they were unbeatable in the long run. But once they let their training down, they didn't want to carry the shields anymore. They wanted to use the bow and arrow to do everything long distance because they didn't want to do the hand-to-hand fighting anymore. You see, and that's when they lost their empire. We lose our lives when we stop putting in the work. Unfortunately, believing is work. It's hard work. And now we go to 5 and 6, verse 17. And take the helmet of salvation and the sword of the Spirit, which is the word of God. And the helmet of salvation, look up the word salvation. It's not the Greek word sozo, like you might be thinking. It's a word that means defense or the defender. And I take it both ways. It's for your defense to help keep your noggin intact, you see. But it's also you're putting on the mindset you're going to defend each other. So this is the mindset that Paul's sharing finally. You see, it's the helmet of defense, the helmet of a defender. I am going to help you. I'm going to take care of you. I'm going to protect you. I'm going to see things about you that I can help that you'll never see. And you're going to help me at the same time. That's the testudo. That's what Paul's talking about. That's the body of Christ that he talked about earlier in Ephesians. And number 6, so that's a helmet of a defender of salvation, and the sword of the Spirit, which is the Word of God. You know, a sword, this is the only thing that's really offensive or on the offense in this whole panoply of things. The only thing missing out of what Paul said here was the javelin, which they always carried. And it's pretty wild, but that would be the first thing that the Romans threw before they went into battle, is they would all throw their javelins. And the javelins had a soft tip to them. They would go through the enemy's shields, and then they would bend. So now the enemy had their shields. They got this thing hanging off the front of it, and so it was hard. It was hard for them to keep their shields up. So this whole thing is talking about after the battle's already started. Because if you're alive, your battle's already started. The javelin's been thrown. You're in it, baby. You're in the fray whether you like it or you don't like it. And so here's how you deal with it. You know, this is exactly how you deal with it. You know, here's how to beat up on your enemy. Of course, first you have to recognize where the evil's coming from, like we talked about. Then you got to really get used to using your stuff, using who you are, using your abilities to the greatest level to help you, which is really designed to help other people. You're here for each other. You know, we're here for each other. So number 1, we protect our ability. Number 2, become one, become comfortable with what's right. You just fit perfectly into what's right. Number 3, make peace a unique part of you, where it just fits you. It's how you do peace. Or I could just say, do peace. Be peace. Number 4, protect each other, the testudo, with believing. This is with believing. Believing is a mindset. It's a picture so clear, so vivid, that it can't be missed. That it's you have it before you have it. You see, number 5, decide to defend. That helmet of salvation. And number 6, as we push with our believing, we can overcome our fears or our enemy. Because those Roman soldiers, they push with that shield in a big line, and then the other people are and then they would just poke out between with the little swords, you know, at the enemy that already has their shields taken out. It was, I mean, they had this thing figured out. Sometimes they'd make like a V formation and funnel the enemy in and just annihilate them as they came into these funnels. I mean, they had it. They use these they use this perfectly. Use your power of believing perfectly. It fits. It works. Finally, you know, Paul used the common gear of a Roman soldier to teach a greater truth. And no matter how we got to this place in life, there's a way to rectify the situation as long as we do it together. See, we have an enemy who's tried to reshape or reroute our lives, but we have a good God that has helped us keep the vision of who we are and given us the ability to evolve in our believing so that we can believe together and lock out the intimidating attacks of the enemy. It's testudo time, people. Shields up. God bless.